You're listening to episode 32 of Literacy in Color. Today's guest is Brooke Vitale, a seasoned children's book editor, prolific author, and the founder of Charge Mommy Books. With over 15 years in the publishing world, Brooke has edited thousands of titles and has worked with top children's book publishers, including Penguin Random House, Scholastic, HarperCollins, and Disney Book Group, to publish more than 100 books. Her books have sold over 500,000 copies and counting. In addition to writing, she helps aspiring authors bring their stories to life through freelance editing and self-publishing support. Charge Mommy Books are truly among some of my favorites on the market, so I'm so excited to talk with her today about what goes into crafting high-quality decodable books and why they matter so much in the world of early literacy. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. Today we're joined by Brooke Vitale, and she is an author, an editor, and the founder of Charge Mommy Books. And I'm so excited to have her here today because we're going to dig into the creation process and kind of the art behind creating decodable books. And I think this is such an interesting topic because we know decodable books are the foundation of structured literacy instruction for your littles. We want to provide our students with controlled phonics experiences so that they can apply what they're learning into print and give them those rich experiences so they can build those neural pathways and do all of the important brain work with decodable readers. But what's really special about Brooke is that she has such vast experience in the editorial and book writing and publishing world that I thought it would be really cool to chat about the creation process behind the scenes, because oftentimes we don't get a glimpse into that world. And for myself personally, I've talked about it before, but I've always been an artist and I always appreciate the art and the intentions that go into things. So I'm really excited to be chatting with Brooke here today. So first of all, welcome to the show, Brooke.
Michelle, thank you.
Can you just give us a little bit of your background and briefly share about your journey as a children's book author and editor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a children's book editor for a little more than 20 years. I started smack out of college, got my master's degree from NYU in publishing, and at the same time, I was interning at a publishing company called Sterling Publishing, which is owned by Barnes & Noble. And at the time, Sterling was primarily an adult publisher known for DIY books, so a lot of woodworking and cookbooks, but we had a very small children's department. And I got lucky because somebody left and I was able to get an opening in that department. And we didn't put out a ton. We did some puzzle books, we did a couple of picture books, but my boss at the time was absolutely fabulous. She took me under her wing. She taught me a lot about storytelling and how to craft a picture book. So I was at Sterling for a few years, and then I moved on to Penguin, where I worked in the Grosset and Dunlap department, which is their mass market department. And what that means is it's the group that's putting out all of the licensed tie-in books. It's the one that's putting out all of the board books and the seasonal titles. And they put out more than most of the other imprints. So it was a lot of work all at once. And I really had to learn how to move fast, how to be nimble, how to watch what my costs were going to be to make sure that I could keep a book where it needed to be. I was there for about 2 years, and then a position opened up at Disney. So I moved over to Disney. I was there for 8 years. And over that time, what I worked on really grew a lot. I came on initially to be what was called their custom editor. And that meant that any customer who wanted something made specifically for them, I was the person who was in charge of making it. So I did a lot of books for Costco. I did a lot for Target. We did a lot of joint books with companies that wanted something dropped into their product. So Kellogg's or a diaper company. But as the company changed, as the department changed, I took on a lot of the editorial that was there. So I really had hands in almost everything. I was in meeting with producers for the upcoming movies, reading scripts, listening to their thoughts on how their stories were developing. And that was really just fascinating because it's one thing to be an editor working on a picture book, but to be listening to the producers of Frozen telling you why they're making the changes that they're making, it's a whole different education in storytelling. And I really take that with me when I approach my books now because I've seen it from both the movie side and from the book side.
That is so cool. Just reading off your resume, I was like, oh my gosh, but hearing you speak about it, Barnes and Nobles and Penguin and Disney and your affiliation with all of these big name companies, I could tell it has shaped, obviously, who you are, but it gives you just such a well rounded look into your book creation process. And so many educators like to write their own decodable sentences or stories or passages, but there is this art of storytelling behind it. And I love that you have that experience from the book realm and from the movie realm. So that's really, really special. So, in terms of writing decodable books, what led you down that journey?
So it was interesting. We started this journey in COVID, really. My son was 4, heading into kindergarten. The preschool had closed down. I had absolutely no idea what he was going to need to know going into kindergarten because I'm not an educator, right? So I said, okay, well, I guess we're home. I'm going to teach him how to read. And I pulled out all of my early readers, of which I have hundreds, many of which I've written myself. And I said, I really don't like these books. This isn't going well. And so I said, well, okay, I'm going to write a couple of early readers on my own. I'll just do simpler. And the thing about early readers from a publishing perspective is what we are taught is small word is better. So it's not don't use the word cow because the diphthong is going to be a problem. It's don't use the word hippopotamus because it's too many syllables. So I wrote these books and I said, okay, they're fun stories, but they're still not what they need to be. So around that time, I was talking to Marissa Ware, who is our literacy specialist, and she said to me, no, no, no. What you need is decodable readers. And I said, okay, that's great. I have no idea what that means. So she started to explain it to me. And I said, okay, thank you. Still don't really understand. So I would say it was a year, 2 years of the two of us going back and forth and her really explaining to me, what does this mean? How is this employed? What is the scope and sequence? How are children learning how to read? And slowly, as she was doing that, I would write some sentences and say, does this work? Does that work? Does the next thing work? And we ended up ultimately on our first stage of books, which was our short vowel books, and said, okay, well, I think I can do this. I'm a storyteller. You're an educator. We can do this together to make books that are good for kids. So let's try. And that's how we got started with it.
That's awesome. And I didn't realize that you were affiliated with Marissa Ware until I saw you guys at the Reading League together. And I was like, oh,
Yep.
what a dynamic duo you have there. She is so brilliant. I actually just saw her present recently at the Unlocking Sword conference too. And what an asset to have on your team. So that is so special. I love that collaboration because then you do have that educator side of things.
It's been fantastic. And actually, our kids, our older children were in preschool together, which is how we met. And now our younger ones are in their classes together in elementary school. They were in kindergarten together and now they're in second grade together. So it's fun for us, maybe not for the teachers when our kids keep saying, don't tell us to look at pictures. We're not doing that.
Yeah. Or then your holiday gift becomes a pack of your own decodables.
Exactly.
So funny. Well, you got to move the needle somehow, right?
Exactly.
I love it. So, reflecting early on this writing process alongside Marissa, can you tell us a little bit about the first decodable you ever wrote and maybe what did you learn from that experience?
I have no idea what the first one I wrote was, honestly, because it was a lot of back and forth. I think really what I did was write those sentences. And I would say to her, does this sentence work? Does that sentence work? And then I was just trying to understand what really is a decodable text. If I had to hazard a guess, and now we're talking about 4 years ago, the first one I probably wrote was our short A book, Cat Had a Hat. But all five of our short vowel books came out together. So I'm not 100% sure that was the first one that I actually got down on paper. But, even with those, it was just going through them and saying, do we have what we need here? Is this going to be something that a child can read? And truthfully, when we wrote our first ones, we were testing the waters. We really weren't sure if this was a thing that was going to be viable, if this was going to be a thing that I could get out into the world. So we hadn't 100% nailed down where we were going with the books. After the first one came out, we said, okay, it's time to make sure that we are 100% sure where every book is going. What is the plan moving forward? So those first ones were definitely just a labor of trying to understand what decodable readers actually are and what kids need from them.
Yeah. And I can say from personal experience, Charge Mommy Books has a special place in my heart because my older daughter, she is 5, she's in pre-K, but I taught her how to read. We were working at CBC level. I remember I put a decodable in front of her months ago, and she was segmenting the sounds in every word and just not blending them together. And it was painfully too hard. And so we scaled back and I was like, okay, maybe she's just not ready for books yet. And recently we tried reading your book one, The Cap, and she was a pro and she was so proud of herself because it was her very first book that she ever read. And so now I can say that Charge Mommy Books is the very first book that my daughter ever read. And she says it's one of her favorite books. And then when it's time to read at night for bedtime, sometimes she says, can you read me a story or can we read a book that I can read? And she knows the difference because she knows this one is a storytelling book and this one is a book that has words that are at my skill level. So really special.
I love that. I love that. By the time I started writing these, my older son was reading beautifully. I've been very lucky. Neither of my children have had any difficulty with reading once they learned how to break the code. My younger son, though, was a more reluctant reader, even though he could. So these always got tested with him. I sat down, I made sure that he could read them. We went through even the activities at the end. Can you identify all of the pictures at the end of them? Is there something that seems obvious to me that isn't going to be obvious to a 5-year-old? So he was the same way. He chose Hop Frog. That was his favorite for a long time. And he kept saying, I'm going to read this one. I'm going to read this one. Until I finally had to say to him, okay, I'm thrilled that you want to, but this is memorized. We need to move on to another one now. And luckily, he also at this point is an avid reader, but I'm just like you. I started my kids on these books.
Love it. I know we're going to work our way through. And the pictures are so engaging. She's laughing at the illustrations and pictures are not bad in books. Oftentimes we hear like, don't look at the picture. Well, your picture is not your decoding strategy, but your picture adds information to the context in which you're reading. And there's a lot of inferring work that can go into there and discussion work that you can talk about in terms of comprehension and such. Even if the comprehension is not rich and sophisticated, we always read with a purpose.
Exactly. And in those early ones, it's challenging to include much tier 2 vocabulary because obviously we're talking very simple words that they need to be able to read. But the farther we go into the books, we try to include more of that rich vocabulary. And the way that I look at our decodable readers is the same way that I look at a picture book. So I'm always telling my authors when I'm editing a picture book, the art and the text work together to tell a story. But your text does not need to tell us what we can see on the page already. So I approach our art in that same way, where it's enhancing the story, but it should not be viewed in such a way that you can say, oh, okay, I understand. This must be the word because this is what I'm seeing on this page. It should add some extra level of humor and some extra comprehension to the overall story, not necessarily just to being a guessing point for those words.
Yeah, I love that. Enhancing. Your words are your ice cream sundae, and the pictures like the sprinkles and the toppings.
Exactly.
I love the quote that teaching students how to read is rocket science, but I also love the perspective that teaching students how to read is also an art. And I think the same can be said about decodable books. There is a lot of scientific work that is going into controlling these phonics patterns and making sure things are just right. Sometimes when we're trying to control a text very heavily, It can lead to awkward sentence structure or stifled language, or like you said, just lack of tier two vocabulary because you can't use certain words just yet. But I love your perspective that there is an art behind the creation process as well. So, how do you think a truly well crafted decodable book out there can be set apart from other books on the market? What is special about a truly well crafted decodable?
So, number one, I think, is story. I see a lot of decodable books out there that have part of a plot, right? But they're not a complete story. And like I said, I look at our decodable books like I would a picture book. It needs to be a real story with a beginning, a middle, and end to it. There needs to be a conflict to be overcome. There needs to be a setting, some character development. Just because it's decodable doesn't mean that those elements can't be there. I think that a decodable reader that just is a bunch of words slapped on a page is an insult to a reader who's trying to read it. They still want to have a quality story. They still want to be engaged in the story. Even if it's simpler words, if they're not feeling a connection to that character, if they're not feeling a connection to the plot that's unfolding, they're going to put it down. They're not going to pick it up again, and they're not going to pick up the next one, which means that you have now hindered their ability to learn how to read, right? Because they need to want that book in front of them. They need to want to practice. They need to not even realize they are practicing their skill and just think that they're successfully reading a book. And I think a lot of that really does come down to story. And I think a lot of it also comes down to humor. If a kid is not laughing when they are reading one of our books, I have done something wrong. Not every one of our books is going to have you cracking up from beginning to end, but I target having that hook at the end where you laugh or you say, oh, I did not see that coming. Whatever it is that makes you want to go back and read it again. Again, it needs to be a real story for them. The other thing that I think really does set a well crafted decodable book apart from others is the word variety. I think that it's really easy to say, okay, I'm doing a digraph book and here are 12 digraph words, and I'm going to just repeat those same 12 words over and over again. But if you're repeating the same 12 words over and over again, you're teaching a child to memorize those 12 words, not to decode the overall spelling pattern. So that's why I try to include as many different words that fit each spelling pattern as I can. That doesn't mean a word is never going to be repeated in a story. Of course, it's going to be repeated. But I target having between 40 and 60% of the unique words in any one of our books follow that spelling pattern. But that's a lot of words to put in front of a kid. And the more of them they have, the more practice they have with that sound in different ways. So I think that variety is incredibly, incredibly important. The last thing I think is, as you were saying, the grammar, the stilted language. It can't read awkwardly. It can't read in a way that is different than how we are teaching our children to speak and to write. It needs to model good grammar for them. Because if it's not modeling good grammar, if it's not modeling good sentence structure, then we are teaching them that it's okay to speak in half sentences. It's okay to flip your words around so that they read strangely. In the same way that children use picture books and chapter books and anything that they listen to learn about language, they're using these books to learn about language as well. And I want these books, whether it's mine or a different decodable, to be a model they can look at and say, no, it needs to be this way. And I cannot tell you how many times Marissa looks at our books and says to me, please just don't start a sentence with the word but. We teach our kids not to start a sentence with the word but. And she's right. Every once in a while, you can't get away from it. And every once in a while, we do speak that way. But where we can, our books are written, generally speaking, in present tense because past tense introduces challenges as far as decodable words. So we don't flip back and forth because you wouldn't flip back and forth when you were speaking. You would teach a child to use present tense or to use past tense consistently when they're telling a story. All of those things need to be there for it to be a quality decodable book.
Yeah. And even to the grammar piece, like I noticed even in your book one, you mentioned it in the present tense, but there will be a suffix S denoting the verb tense. The character runs rather than saying the character did run because you're trying to avoid that S. But at the same time, as a teacher, we can preface our entire lesson and introduce it in the context of oral language. And this is the way that we're uniquely speaking. When we come to this word, there's an S at the end. This is what it means. That's why it's important to slide through the phonics, but it's also important that students are able to connect it back to the language that is already in their heads to make that bridge between that oral language piece and now text written down. So I love that. And especially the story arc. You're so right. That's the thing that's missing from a lot of decodable texts out there because we control the phonics so much. We write a slew of sentences together, and yes, they practice a skill, but what does it tell us at the very end of the day?
Right.
Maybe they just read a few sentences and that's that.
And it's also hard to practice comprehension when there's not a story arc. When you have a full story, you can say, well, why do you think the character made that choice? What do you think they're going to do next? When they're disconnected sentences, that's it. You're done reading. You move on.
Exactly. And some people will criticize decodable text. It robs the joy of reading. And you think back to those predictive texts in kindergarten, like you were mentioning, I see a cow, I see a pig, I see a barn. Where's the joy in that anyway?
Right.
But at the same time, your character development and your story structure might not be as sophisticated as it will be in a book that comes later along in a student's career, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be there at all. So I love that students have experience with that very early on with your books because it sets them up for more sophisticated work down the road.
Absolutely.
How do you ensure a balance between the phonics control and the meaningful storytelling?
Honestly, I look at my words, and this is how I typically work. I have a word list that I'm starting with. Whatever we're working on writing at the moment, I'll sit with a printout that has been alphabetized in an Excel document, and here's my words that I can choose from. I just kind of stare at it for a while and see what jumps out at me. It might be that I say, okay, I'm going to tell a story about this, and that is just, I'm off and running. It might be that I'm able to pull out a couple of sentences and then I start thinking about how they connect to each other. It might be that I'm looking at, are there some connective words here that I can use? I was writing a story recently for diphthongs and I was looking at my list and I said, okay, I've got mouse, I've got crawl, I've got paw. Okay, I've sort of starting to see something come together here. But that doesn't mean I'm always getting something. And so, really, for me, that balance comes down more to knowing that I'm working with that word list to begin with. That's my list of available words. And that, secondly, if I'm not seeing that story, if I'm not seeing that connection, I walk away. I have sat and I've struggled to try to write something where I've got an idea in my head and I know where I want to go with it, but I can't figure out how to get there. It's not worth it. Come back to it another time. If it's not coming through, there's not going to be anything meaningful there. So it's just not worth trying in that moment.
You're like the Michelangelo. I remember learning like Michelangelo used to stare at the big brick of marble and figure out like what kind of work is going to come out of it. You're the artist.
A mouse with a paw.
There you go. How do you decide on what the illustrations would be after you get your text down on paper?
So usually as I'm writing it, I have a fairly good idea of what it is that I want to see happening. And I will then write out the manuscript. And the first thing that I have to do with the manuscript once I have it written down is I need to paste it into its page breaks because all of our books, with the exception of the very newest one, are 24 pages long. So I know that we have 8 pages of literacy activities at the back. We have 14 pages of story in it. So I need to start breaking it up and seeing, okay, where are these page breaks going? Where am I making sure that I don't have more than 1 or 2 sentences to a page because we don't want it to be too much for a kid? One of the things that I learned working on picture books is that you always want to have some sort of change of scene or change of emotion or a moment that's going to catch you by surprise where you say, oh, what's going to happen next? That always comes right before you turn a page because you want to force that page turn. So I'm looking at the books from that perspective as well as I'm breaking those pages up to say, this is a kid with learning how to read. I need to make sure they want to turn the page to find out what's going to happen next. That if it's, oh my gosh, what did he see? That the next page is not that. You have to turn the page to find out what did he see. So once that's done, then I can start thinking about what that art is going to look like. What can we put on the art that's going to tell the story but is not necessarily going to give away what those words are on the page. Sometimes it's as simple as just saying, okay, it's going to be a boy carrying a ball, and that's fine. Sometimes there is something more that I want to show in the background of the story. It's also deciding, is each image going to be a single page piece of art, or is it going to be a spread that covers both sides of the book? If it's a spread that covers both sides of the book, if a character is talking on one side and then a different character is talking on the other side, have I set up the scene to ensure that the one who is talking is visually on that page? Do we need to adjust the scene? Does the character need to move from one side of the room to the other to make sure that now that they're speaking first, they're showing up on the left-hand side? It's a lot of playing around with it to really make sure that you're doing service to what the page looks like, even if you are not looking at the text that goes with it. But beyond that, I have absolutely fabulous illustrators. I trust them. They are amazing. So sometimes what you see on the page comes from them and not from me. I give them a rough idea and they say, oh, but I put this thing in the background. Is that okay? Yeah, that's great. I love it. Go for it. So it's really a collaborative effort between us. Once I give them a basic idea of what we're going for them to say, well, here's what I think the character should look like, or here's what I think should be going on in the background that they're not even noticing. And you'll notice as you move through our books, the art does get more elaborate the further on you go, because the kids can handle picking up more of what's going on the page rather than just looking at the 5 words on the page.
There's like a psychology behind the intentionality behind everything. I'm sure too, working for Disney, you hide a bunch of Easter eggs in there every bit of the way.
We can't do a ton with them, but what we have started doing is the first ones that we put out were the short vowel stage 1 books. So we just put out our pre-stage 1. And I said, what can we do here that calls back for people who already know them or for kids who start here and move up? So we started looking at our old characters and saying, what connections can we draw here? So the character Ted, who is a side character in 10 Hens, got his own book in the pre-stage 1. The character Jen, who is the lead in 10 Hens, turns out to be the owner of the dog Gus from the stage 1. So we're just sort of playing with that so we can build a little bit of a world. Because when a kid is reading a book, they will start to notice, hey, I know that character. I know that one. Oh, look, that's happening. So again, it gives them something else in the art that they can pick up on, even if I never use that word in the text.
What a connection. I love that. And I also love on Instagram, sometimes you post these polls and you'll give us 2 cover options or 2 layout options and have people vote, which one do you like better? That's always so much fun for me. I like to read the comments too, like what did other people pick? Do they have the same style as I do?
It's very interesting because I'm working in a vacuum. When I was at Disney, when I was at Penguin, I was in an office, and especially at Disney, we had an open floor plan. So people were always walking around, talking to each other, sharing ideas. What do you think about this? Hey, there's something funny about this art. What do you think about it? Well, I'm not in that position now, right? So I look at things, Marissa looks at things, my designer, who is amazing, looks at things. But even by the time she sees them, we're a little bit farther along. And I'm not on the ground with kids, especially with the younger stuff. Even Marissa, it's been a while since she has worked with the youngest of children. She works with slightly older kids now. So a lot of times when I show stuff on Instagram, I get really valuable feedback that wouldn't occur to me. Even in the castle one that you were talking about, when we first started that one, we had the dad taking a nap in a car as opposed to taking a nap on a lounge chair outside. And we got a lot of feedback from people that said, you know what? It's not safe. We live in the South where that could be really dangerous. Why is he doing that? And that's the kind of feedback where we say, well, thank you. Let me fix that right now before this becomes a published book. Everybody has their own world experience. And that doesn't mean that every comment that comes through is going to be one that I'm going to take. But when that same kind of comment starts showing up a lot, it's something that I need to listen to and I need to make that adjustment because you guys are working with kids and you know what they are thinking as they're going through this process. So I want your feedback as much as possible. I want it.
Well, we're happy to give it. That's the wonderful thing about Instagram. You just, you put something out there and people are so happy to share their opinions and
Yeah.
just experiences. So I love that you take that all into consideration when you're crafting your texts. So when it comes to decodable books, are there any common misconceptions that you'd like to clear up?
I think the obvious one is that they're boring. That's what you hear more than anything. Oh, decodable text is boring. Or as you were saying, it robs the joy of learning to read from kids. 100% there are some that are. I think we've all seen ones that I've written them that are terrible. Every one that I write, I read them to my kids, I read them to my husband. If they're not all laughing, I throw the story away. I have a trash pile full of ones that I thought were good that just didn't work. But they don't have to be. I think that's the misconception is knowing that just because it's decodable doesn't mean there can't be something rich to it.
Definitely. And it all goes back to having that well crafted story you were talking about before. And something that's really special about your books in particular, you mentioned the 24 pages. I love those activities that you have in the back because it's an extension to the work that they were just doing and being able to apply that phonics skill in different ways with all the different activities that you have to offer. And I know you
Yeah.
also even include QR codes for printable activities too. So I think that's so valuable for teachers.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you all have a lot on your plates. You do not need to be trying to figure out what's the next activity that keeps somebody going. That's for teachers and for parents. And we have a lot of parents who are buying these who don't know how to teach their children how to read, who are trying. So, whatever extra resource we can give that just makes that job a little bit easier, that either lets a parent hand something over or lets a teacher have something that they do this in center time. I need to finish what I'm doing. We're happy to try and give those extra resources. And just like the books, every page of those has been fully vetted through Marissa. She checks every word, she checks every picture. We want to make sure that even if it's a free resource, it still is as high quality as it can be.
So appreciated. So thank you for that. As we wrap things up, do you have any last words, any final piece of advice you want to leave with educators around decodables?
I do. So, the thing that I would love to remind educators or parents, whoever is using them, is we know that not every book is decodable to every student. And I would just say be aware that just because they're not at that level doesn't necessarily mean it's a book that they can't use yet. Every scope and sequence for learning phonics is different. And you might find that there are a couple of words in any one book that a kid doesn't know yet. Just take the time for whatever you're going to give them to pre read it to make sure that you feel comfortable either working with them on those words or pre teaching those words, that you're aware if there is something in there. We don't ever want to catch a kid off guard with a word that is not something that they can read that is going to hurt their confidence. So, better to be able to say, I know this is coming. Let's have a conversation about it first. This isn't on you that you can't read it. We haven't taught you that skill yet. So that's the biggest thing that I would say is read every decodable you get. Make sure it feels like a good fit for you and just be aware of what is actually inside of it. When we do our books, the front cover of each of our books lists all of the words that fit the phonics skill we're teaching, lists all of the words that come from the phonics skill as a pack as a whole. So if it's a vowel teams and there's another vowel team word in there, we let you know. Anything high frequency. But the example I always give teachers is for us, vowel teams is our stage 7. For many people, they teach our control, which we have as stage 6, after they teach vowel teams. And there may be some of those words in there. That's why for us, our scope and sequence lists every word in every one of our books so you can take a look at it and you can see what else is hiding. And I would just encourage any teacher to actually take that moment for whichever book they're using, have that read through, make a list of any words that a kid might stumble on so that you prepare them for it before they go in.
That's so helpful. And from the research point of view, too, there is no research that outlines the perfect decodability percentage for a text. Some people want to push for 100% decodability. There are some states out there that say decodable should be between 75% and 80% decodable words. But like you said, decodability is relying on the text, it's relying on the reader. and anything that students may not be able to slide through with their personal phonics knowledge, then why not pre-teach it beforehand, look at it ahead of time? Like I was reading with my daughter the other day, we used that front cover as a warm-up, and we were going through all of the words together as a warm-up. And okay, now we feel confident about these words. We're going to read it in a whole book. And I think that's really valuable that you offer that right in the front cover for students and parents and teachers and families to access ahead of time. So that's really, really helpful.
And I think it's important to know, especially with the super early stages, it's almost impossible to be 100% decodable because there are certain words that you simply cannot get away from in the English language, right? When you're talking short vowel, you can't tell a story without using the word the. Good luck to you. It's not decodable at that stage, but you can't get away from it. So there's a balance between saying, I threw in these 6 words that really have no business being there, and okay, we kept it to a minimum, but we need the words the, of, whatever those words are that just form our language at its core.
Yeah, the and we don't speak or write without those ever.
Exactly.
They're high frequency for a reason. And we're not waiting until schwa to teach those.
Exactly. They need to know them. Just be aware they're there.
Yes. So this has been so helpful. I am so glad I had the chance to chat with you about this. I'm sure my listeners too will be so delighted to hear about the process behind creating decodable books. So where can people connect with you further? Perhaps find your decodable resources, or maybe someone has a little artistic inkling and they'd like to go down the book writing path themselves. How can they get in touch with you?
So we have our own website, which is shop.chargemommybooks.com. So you can find our books there. We are also available on Amazon. And for schools that work with Booksource, we're available through them. And we are on Instagram at Charge Mommy Books, on Facebook at Charge Mommy Books. Those are the 2 places where we're most interacting with people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.